Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we want you to think back to your own school days for a second,
Hmm.
but not just, the classes or the tests. Think about the building itself, the rules, the teachers, the dress codes,
Yeah,
and that feeling you got about where you fit. Because those unspoken expectations, they often shape us way more than any textbook.
that is the core of our mission today. We're unpacking a whole stack of sources that detail how educational institutions are, well, these incredibly powerful agents of socialization.
So they're not just teaching algebra.
Not at all. They guide career paths, they enforce gender norms, and a lot of the time they perpetuate inequity in ways that are
Hmm.
really subtle, often unintentional, but very persistent.
And that's so critical because the idea you got in school about who's good at science, for example,
Yeah.
that follows you right into the workplace.
Absolutely. It dictates who gets hired, who gets promoted, who we just assume is in charge.
So to get into this, we need a few key ideas on the table first.
Right. Let's set the stage. There are three core concepts. First up is agents of socialization.
Okay.
It's a formal term for the forces that teach us how to behave in society. So that your family, the media, your friends, and of course the education system.
The mechanisms for how we learn the rules.
Precisely. And that leads to the second idea, the hidden curriculum.
This is the stuff that's not on the syllabus.
Exactly. It's all the knowledge that is not explicitly taught. Lessons about gender stereotypes, cultural expectations, who has power,
Hmm.
all the things you just absorb by being there.
So you learn it by osmosis, basically.
You do. And the third concept ties it all together, implicit bias. This is the unintentional belief or expression of bias that, teachers, administrators, even the system itself can carry,
Even with the best intentions.
especially with the best intentions. It's where so many of these subtle problems begin.
Okay, let's unpack this invisible classroom because the sources show these lessons starting really, really early.
They do.
We learn how to take turns, how to wait in line, but right alongside that, we're learning about gender.
Who uses which bathroom? What clothes are okay for whom? How you're supposed to act in a public space.
And teachers are reinforcing this all the time. The sources talk a lot about this attention gap.
Yes, the attention gap. The research on this is just overwhelming. It shows that generally, boys get a lot more attention in the classroom.
Both good and bad attention, right?
Both for positive contributions and for, behavioral corrections.
Okay, but hang on. If they're getting a mention for both good and bad behavior, isn't that just, more attention overall? How do we know it's actually detrimental to girls?
That's a great question because it's not about the quantity, it's about the nature of the attention. When boys get more airtime, they get more chances to participate, to challenge, even to disrupt.
Okay.
For girls, the expectation is often quiet compliance. So this lack of focused attention, especially in subjects like math, can be internalized. They start to feel like they're less important in that space.
So the implicit message is this subject belongs to the boys.
It can be. And the consequence is academic. The source material directly correlates this dynamic with lower math scores for girls. It becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Wow. And this implicit bias, it also shows up in how behavior itself is interpreted, right? Like in special education.
Oh, massively. The disparities are huge. Boys are referred for special education services for learning and emotional disabilities way more often than girls.
How much more?
One study pointed out that males made up something like 73% of students with learning disabilities and 76% with emotional disabilities.
That's a huge skew. It almost suggests that, say, restlessness in a boy is seen as a problem needing intervention, but if a girl is struggling quietly, it just gets overlooked.
It gets overlooked. And that different interpretation starts to shape life paths very early. It flows right into career tracking.
Which used to be totally overt.
Completely. In the mid-1800s, education for women was explicitly about preparing them for certain roles. Elementary school teachers, nurses, home managers.
And subjects like math and science.
Typically reserved for men. The system wasn't just reflecting gender roles. It was actively building them.
Cementing them.
Yes. Now, those explicit barriers are gone, but the tracking is still happening. It's just subtler.
It starts in elementary school when kids get regrouped, and then it gets more serious in high school with the college track versus the trade track.
Exactly. And the ticket to that college track and to opportunity in general is now the credential, the diploma.
Ah, right. Credentialism. The sources define this as the huge emphasis we place on these formal documents, sometimes even more than actual skill.
And credentialism is fascinating because it's both a barrier and an opportunity. Right now in the U.S., more women get bachelor's degrees than men.
So it's a way to level the playing field.
In some ways, yes. It provides a standardized, measurable accomplishment that's harder to dismiss with bias.
But that creates a tension, doesn't it? Does that mean the BA is now a necessary hurdle for women that maybe some men can bypass through, I don't know, informal networks?
That is the critical tension. For someone with a lot of privilege or connections, that piece of paper might be optional. For many women, it becomes mandatory just to get in the door.
Okay, let's shift from careers to the body, to the physical rules. Let's talk dress codes.
Mhm.
The intention is often good, right, to stop kids from being judged on how expensive their clothes are.
That's the stated goal.
Mhm.
But they often end up creating these pretty profound gender inequities.
Mostly by targeting girls.
Absolutely. The rules about midriffs or shoulder straps, without similar rules for boys. It just reinforces this hidden idea that a girl's appearance is a distraction that needs to be policed.
And people push back on this legally.
They do. There was a case in 2014. A federal court struck down a high school basketball team's rule that boys had to have short hair
Why?
because there was no similar rule for the girls' team. The court saw it was an unequal standard.
And this also comes up with religious freedom.
All the time. The sources point to legal findings that repeatedly protect the right of Muslim women to wear the hijab in schools and at sporting events.
Right. And another finding overturned a Texas school that suspended a Native American kindergartner for having long hair. It was protected on the basis of religious freedom.
So the school's attempt to enforce one kind of order runs right into these fundamental rights.
Exactly. And if you connect that idea of regulating bodies to the historical mindset, you find these really disturbing attempts to prove that gender differences were biological.
The bad old days of pseudoscience.
The worst. In the 1800s, there was this relentless effort to prove women were naturally inferior, basically to justify their social status.
How did they try to do that?
Researchers would claim women's brains were less developed. They argued that because men are physically larger, their brains must be larger and better suited for, complex thought.
So instead of just educating women, the establishment invented a biological reason why they shouldn't be.
A classic case of bias driving the research. But modern science has just completely debunked all of it.
It's definitive now. Oh yes, the research is clear. There is no biological basis for gendered academic ability. Studies show all genders use the exact same neural systems for math development.
So the brain functions are similar.
They're similar. Biology isn't destiny here. The social environment is.
Which brings us to single-gender education. What about that argument?
Yep.
That separating classrooms can reduce those social pressures.
The results there are very mixed, especially for academics.
Historically, those schools just reinforced stereotypes, didn't they?
They really did. Girls learn childcare, boys learn public speaking. The modern concern is that it might inhibit the social skills you need for a co-ed world.
And what does the research say about performance? Does it actually help?
A massive review. It looked at 1.66 million people across 21 countries, found absolutely no benefit to single-sex classrooms for K-12 students.
No benefit at all.
None. Not in math, science, or verbal skills.
But is there any area where it does seem to help?
There is one, consistently. PE class.
Physical education.
Yes. Single-gender PE classes seem to increase perceived self-ability for female students. When they aren't worried about gender norms or performing for boys, they participate more freely.
That's really interesting. Let's talk about power then. Who actually runs the schools? Even though public school teachers are overwhelmingly female, 3/4?
Without that, yes.
The sources show a very clear glass ceiling. Men are far more likely to be principals, administrators.
And superintendents. Only about a quarter of school district superintendents are women.
And that sends a message. That's part of the hidden curriculum.
One of the most powerful parts? Students see women as the nurturers, the implementers. But they see men in the positions of ultimate authority. It teaches a lesson about who holds the real power.
And it's not just the staff, right? The bias is baked into the curriculum itself.
It is. Think about who historically created academic content. The theorists, the researchers, the textbook authors.
Overwhelmingly white, male, and heterosexual.
Right. And so their viewpoint becomes the default. It's just presented as mainstream knowledge.
And that's where the lack of teacher diversity is so damaging.
It is. The teacher population does not reflect the student population. For example, black men are hugely underrepresented. They're only about 2–3% of all public school teachers.
And we know that representation is vital.
It's proven to be. Research confirms that students of color benefit, profoundly, when they're taught by a teacher of the same race or ethnicity, especially for students who might be struggling.
But there are efforts to change this. I was interested to read about the Columbia University medical students.
Yes, that's a great example of change from within.
They realized their own curriculum had biases.
And they created a reporting process to identify and address them. It actually led to concrete changes in their courses.
That advocacy is powerful. But we also have to touch on the political tensions around curriculum now.
We do. We're seeing major legislative battles, like Florida's 2022 bill that opponents called the Don't Say Gay bill. It restricts discussion of sexual orientation and gender identity in early grades.
And that debate is really split. Supporters frame it as an issue of parental rights.
Right, parental responsibility. But opponents argue that it actively harms LGBTQ plus children. It makes them feel invisible, or worse, abnormal. It's a real clash over whose story gets told in the classroom.
And this struggle for safety and acknowledgement, it brings us to the most critical failures of the system. Let's talk about violence.
This is where the stakes are highest. And the data is hard to collect because of fear of reporting and, well, non-centralized systems.
But what do we know?
We know that while overall violence in schools has generally gone down, there's been a really disturbing increase in multiple victim homicide incidents.
And are there gender differences in who starts physical fights?
There are. Male students report being in physical fights almost 3 times as often as female students.
But violence isn't just physical anymore.
Not at all. It's electronic. A 2021 report showed 16% of high schoolers said they'd been electronically bullied.
And that bullying targets specific communities.
It does. It was highest for gay, lesbian, or bisexual students. 27% of them reported it, compared to 14% of heterosexual students. And we have to be clear, these could be hate crimes, violent acts motivated by a person's identity.
Let's pivot to higher education now and the crisis of campus sexual assault.
The lifetime statistics are just chilling. 1 out of every 6 women has been the victim of an attempted or completed rape in her lifetime.
And on college campuses, this is deeply tied to power dynamics.
It is. And the data on the most vulnerable populations is just. It's alarming. It shows a systemic failure to provide basic safety.
What are the numbers?
21% of TGQN students, that's transgender, genderqueer, nonconforming, have been sexually assaulted. That's compared to 18% of non-TGQN females. Predators often target victims they see as vulnerable.
This pressure for accountability eventually led to a major federal law.
Yes, the Clery Act. It was passed in 1990 after the tragic rape and murder of a university student named Jean Clary.
And what does it do?
It requires colleges to report their campus crime statistics. Sexual assault, stalking, domestic violence. It's about transparency.
And finally, we have to talk about the barriers for transgender students in K-12 schools.
Their experience is often just one of persistent hostility. A staggering 77% of out or perceived transgender K-12 students reported negative experiences.
Things like harassment and physical attacks.
Yes, or even expulsion. Just getting through a school day is a challenge. A majority of them report avoiding school bathrooms and locker rooms entirely because they feel unsafe.
Which means they can't fully participate in their own education.
Exactly.
So, what does this all mean? I mean, the sources paint a pretty grim picture of structural problems and violence, but there is also this clear history of fighting back.
A powerful history of social change, often led by students and activists. And that fight has led to real legislative action.
The most famous being Title IX.
Right, 1972. It prohibited sex-based discrimination in any education program getting federal money. It was championed by Representative Patsy Takemoto Mink, and it was absolutely revolutionary, especially for women in sports.
And that demand for new perspectives literally created new fields of study.
It did. Women's studies programs started in the 70s. That evolved into gender studies and then queer studies, which challenged the very norms that create these inequalities.
And at the same time, we saw ethnic studies emerge.
Yes. Fields like Chickenau studies and Black Africana studies, they were created to study the history and culture of non-Eurocentric groups.
And finally, we see the activism today in organizations and movements that keep the pressure on.
Absolutely. Groups like RAIN provide critical support. Social media has amplified movements like #MeToo, which was started by Tarana Burke, and #SayHerName, which acknowledges Black women killed by police violence,
These movements force the conversation into the public square.
including inside the schools themselves.
This deep dive really shows just how profoundly education shapes us. It teaches us not just facts, but these powerful, often invisible lessons about who we're supposed to be from the moment we walk into that first classroom.
It does, and the data shows schools are, in many ways, trying to dismantle these old, rigid norms. But that leaves a final question for you, the listener, to think about.
Okay.
Considering all these global efforts to create safe, quality education for everyone, what systems outside of school like the media or workplaces or even family expectations are still reinforcing those old, rigid gender norms? And how does that constant external pressure affect how well students can actually succeed today?
A question that reminds us the learning and the pressure definitely doesn't stop at the school gate. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.